I mean, I think the Parliament did absolutely the right thing and at the right time in terms of reforming the police service. And I'm very struck, the more time that I've spent in this role and the more that I've worked on and with people across in policing across the UK and more widely, how much stronger it has actually made us in terms of delivering a police service that's fit for the future. But without question, you know, there is a clear need to go in that direction. And I think even if you just look south of the border and some of the challenges that are now playing out very openly in select committee inquiries in Westminster and so on around, you know, the challenges of having 43 regional forces and how you actually manage that to provide a police service, you know, that can actually meet the kind of challenges that exist in the world today. You know, these are real issues. I think, you know, I've certainly been very clear about what I think are the really quite significant deficiencies in terms of the early work done or not done to build a police authority that works effectively. And that's something that I've worked very hard on over the last 10 months to turn around. But I think the legislative framework is right, and I think the reforms were absolutely the right direction of travel to go down, and I think the country's better for it. And if I could just add to that, as members are aware, one of the provisions of the statute is that the accountable officer function sits within the police authority. That's a role held by currently our interim chief officer and from next week our new chief executive that will be picking up that role. And I think one of the things that we've worked really hard to do within the SPA is to develop and strengthen that accountable officer function, because that's where obviously the accountability sits for the £1.1 billion budget of policing in Scotland. And part of that is about ensuring that the accountable officer is more active and assertive in the space that is about making representations, whether it's to Scottish Government or whether it's, you know, that slightly more complex landscape, which is also in connection with intergovernmental issues. So there's been quite a number of things recently at the Police Authority Board, for example, and I'm thinking of issues to do with potential additional policing costs of Brexit, especially in the event of a no deal. I'm thinking also about President Trump's visit and so on, where we have very actively sought further information from the Chief Constable about additional policing costs accruing from operations like that, for example, so that the accountable officer can be stronger in the work that he is taking forward in making those representations, including where necessary, either directly with the UK Government where that's appropriate, or more often than not via Scottish Government in terms of their negotiations and representations on issues like the one that you've mentioned.
I think both witnesses will recall the tension which previously existed between Police Scotland and the SPA during the early days of reform. What steps have been taken in the interim period then to improve the situation in the last 5 years?
Well, if I perhaps pick up on that first, I have thoughts and observations of the last 5 years. I'm accountable for the last 10 going on 11 months. And I would particularly direct Ms Gilruth and other members to the additional submission that I put in last week, which set out the range of measures that I've driven forward as chair to get the SPA into the kind of shape that it needs to be in to be an effective and trusted public body, and I hope that members have found that helpful. I'm obviously very happy to take questions on that. In addition, the other thing which I've driven as chair is a big job of work to strengthen leadership and governance in Police Scotland. And frankly, you know, on both fronts, both in terms of the SPA board, the leadership of Police Scotland, and increasingly, although it's still a work in progress, building the capacity of the SPA as an organisation. I think we're in a fundamentally different place from when myself and Ian Livingstone, as then Deputy Chief Constable, appeared before this committee back in January. We are still on a journey. I'm not for a moment saying that everything's exactly where it should be, but I do honestly think that a lot of those early issues that were played out very publicly, you know, around very public spats, frankly, you know, between the SPA and the Chief Constable, including in front of the then Justice Committee and others. I think we've moved on dramatically from there. And what we're really working on now is ensuring that the governance and scrutiny arrangements that we have within the police authority are absolutely fit for purpose to serve our dual role of being able to both support and challenge Police Scotland. So that's about holding the Chief Constable to account, but it's also about fulfilling our statutory obligation to maintain and improve policing. And in the latter, sometimes that's about working very closely with Police Scotland, for example, and taking forward the change programme. On other occasions, as I say, it is our job to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work that he's now doing leading the force. And the fact that we now have a new Chief Constable, 2 Deputy Chief Constables and 2 new Deputy Chief Constables and 3 new Assistant Chief Constables, which accounts for a large part of my summer in terms of designing and executing these recruitment processes, means that we now have, I think, a really strong team at the top of Police Scotland, and we're building that in the SP as well. And I think it's through that strength that we can get into the place that we need to be, that's mutually respectful and works to the benefits of policing in Scotland. I hope that answers your question. I'm conscious I didn't talk about the first 4 years in any great depth.
With regard to your role in terms of providing challenge and support, some might view that as a conflict of interest, perhaps. I wonder, therefore, is the legislation still fit for purpose in terms of governance and accountability between the SPA and Police Scotland?
Yes, thank you. I think these are really important questions to address. If I could take the second point first, and it's that dual challenge and support function. It's often suggested that there's a tension and a difficulty with having that dual function. I completely disagree with that. I mean, I think it's akin in many ways to the role of a government minister, who has got to be, both the biggest ambassador and advocate for the public service or services that they're responsible for, and also be very challenging and hold those services to account. I think it's akin to many different forms of boards, public, private, third sector, where again, trustees or directors have to have that dual function of supporting the organisation while at the same time challenging their executives and so on. So I honestly don't see any conflict in that at all. I think what the SPA has lacked, and I think genuinely what we've now really started to flesh out, both in articulation but also in our governance frameworks and our practices, is frankly a bit of clarity and intellectual rigour around what those different functions are and how you perform them differently. I think the SPA just was never built properly as an organisation. There just wasn't that clarity of purpose. And it's been a huge job of work, and it would be very boring for me to talk through it all. But, I can assure you that this is something that we've addressed at a range of different levels to make sure that we're clear about performing both those roles. In terms of the legislation being fit for purpose, I think that it is crucial. Yes is the short answer. I think you could take any act of any parliament and you could always find areas, particularly through post-legislative scrutiny, where you might find areas to amend and change parts of it. But fundamentally, I think the structure's right. And I think it's critically important, not least given some of the challenges that both Police Scotland and the SPA have faced in the early years, that the organisations now get the chance to really stabilise and develop and deliver policing, and a really formidable programme of change that needs to be taken forward. So that's why the SPA has been really very clear in our submission to say that while we absolutely welcome the post-legislative scrutiny process, I think that's a hugely important learning process, we would urge caution about making any further changes to the Act. And it's something that we hear from policing all the time on the ground. I'm sure I know the Chief Constable hears this too, which is that the police service needs some clarity. And we also as an authority need that clarity and stability of a structure that we can then make work well. And that's really what we're focused on now. I said, I'd circulated, I'd submitted to the committee a paper setting out the improvements and actions that I'd taken over the last 10 months, but I also called out some of the areas that I think we still need to make big improvements on, and this is something that we discussed at the last SPA board meeting, and myself and the Chief Constable have discussed this too, and a huge area is communication. You know, media scrutiny, parliamentary scrutiny, public scrutiny, these are all good, healthy, necessary parts of any democratic process, and certainly the oversight of our police service, and it's part of how we ensure there's public trust and confidence in what the police service does. And I think, you know, it's incumbent both in the Police Authority and on Police Scotland to get an awful lot better at how we communicate, so that we can, and I think the SP in particular has got a big role to play in helping to facilitate and foster good, informed public discourse around what is actually going on in policing now. And in fact, you see some of this, I think, in some of the submissions to the committee, that I think even some of the submissions are referencing practices within Police Scotland or issues within Police Scotland or the SPA that, you know, were from 2 or 3 years ago, that were the very visible things, very often not positive visible things. And I think it's absolutely incumbent on both organisations now, individually and jointly, to engage actively and effectively in that space, so that there is informed coverage and discussion of what's going on in policing.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wonder, just following on from that, if I could ask you, Deacon, is there an issue with whose responsibility for the appointment of the SPA chair?
Well, that's a matter for Parliament. Quite genuinely, when I applied for this role and undertook the process as it was carried out and I was required to engage in, which on that occasion also involved the former chair of the policing subcommittee sitting on the panel that interviewed me. It's entirely a matter for Parliament about how that appointment is done in the future. I have been looking at police governance and a lot of different systems. For what it's worth, I mean, I think the arrangement that we have in place, I mean, I think the concern that members have expressed, and understandably so, you know, is whether ministerial appointments in this or any other role, it compromises the ability of the post holder to perform the role effectively and you know, independently where required to do so. I thus far have not found that an issue. But I do know that in other systems where there's comparable organisations, you know, there's things like confirmation hearings and things like that. But genuinely, it's entirely a matter for the Parliament to consider in the future.